wanted to share a story with you about the time I got a chance as a 16-year-old to race against somebody that I had a poster of on my wall at that time. Tour de France pro and current NBC commentator Bob Roll. First of all, I'll tell you who Bob Roll is. He was a local guy here in the Bay Area that in the early 80s kind of made his name by winning a race up Mount Diablo. And he took that money and basically lived in a tent in Europe and tried to become pro. And he ended up coming back to the United States and joining the only American pro team to go to the Tour de France and the Tour of Italy at that time, the 7-Eleven racing team, which was comprised of mostly Americans, a couple of Europeans. Well, I had that poster as a 15-year-old getting into cycling. They included those posters in Winning magazine, which was your typical, once a month magazine that showed all the European races. Obviously no internet back then, so that was how you got to find out how the race was won. So I started racing in 1984, or start riding in 1984, and one of the rides that I did a lot was one of our mountains or hills called Patterson Pass Road. I do it all the way back and forth to see my friends. So I was getting stronger and stronger, and I knew that the Mount Diablo Challenge, which was not a race anymore, it was just a ride, an event you paid to get into, was coming up in October of '86. I trained really hard for it. I wanted to get a good time, and I remember that morning getting up and being excited. I got up really early. My dad took me there, and there was going to be like 500 people at this ride. I wanted to be at the front and not have to navigate through 500 people. So I got there early. I did a little bit of warm up, but then I stood at the start line for a good 20 to 30 minutes, which was not good because now my legs are not warmed up. Slowly people started coming up to the front of the line with me, and it started backing up as more and more people got to the start line. The lines of rows of people just grew and grew. Well, all of a sudden somebody decides to go around the whole group and come to the front, and wearing the 7-Eleven racing jersey and on the 7-Eleven racing bike is Bob Roll, who had won that race obviously earlier and had just come off of a European season. So I'm like 16 years old and I'm crapping. I'm like, oh my God, Bob Roll is like next to me, and I'm just gonna like act like I don't even know who he is. I'm just freaking out. And so I'm like, okay, so now we have a Tour de France pro against the rest of us who we thought was just going to be a bunch of the local riders. So what's going to happen when this thing starts? I was pretty nervous. So they're about ready to start the whole thing. They say go or hit I don't even remember if it was a horn or what it was, but I jumped into my toe clips and took off and was right with Bob Roll side by side, and it was the fastest. It was like a sprint. It was just a pure sprint from a dead standstill. And there was a picture in the local newspaper of me and Bob Roll side by side for that first little bit, obviously. And we go up the top of this first climb, and then it ducks down to a hard left and then back up some climbing. And I was right with them, but my heart already within the first minute, like I said, it was like a sprint. It was like just goes from 0 to as fast as you can. And I wish I had a heart rate monitor on back then, because I bet you I went from like 100 beats a minute to like 220 beats a minute in a minute or less, because by the time we got to 1 mile up the climb, I felt like I was going to have a heart attack. It was so crazy. The pace was so insane for me at 16 years old. 2 miles up, people are now starting to pass me, and Bob Roll's way gone, and I pull over. And just puked. And you think you're doing pretty good. You think you're like, hey, I'm holding my own at my group rides. I'm holding my own against guys that race in the higher levels. And then you do that all of a sudden. So I got back on the bike and finished under an hour still, which is a good time. You want to talk about just a total humbling experience, but exciting at the same time, and made for a good story. Fast forward a couple years, Bob Roll ended up on the 1988 Giro d'Italia team, where he crested the very famous Paso de Gavia, where it was snowing and American Andy Hampsten took the pink jersey, which was the leading leader of the Tour of Italy, the only American to ever win the Tour of Italy. And so many guys gave up on the top of that mountain. It wasn't supposed to be snowing, and they went ahead and ran the race. And all these guys came across the top of the mountain, and they were just covered in snow. And they had to go down the mountain to finish in Borneo to finish the race. Well, there's a famous image of Bob Roll where he's got hypothermia, and they're trying to almost revive him at the bottom of the mountain because he's so cold, he's collapsing, and there's a guy just working him over to try to warm him up. So many guys just quit at the top of the mountain. It was actually named the day the hard men cried. It turned out to be one of the most famous days ever of the Giro d'Italia. Only American that's ever won it. Andy Hampsten, and Bob Roll helped him win that race in 1988.
Apriamo l'occhio!